I always assumed if I ever wrote a book, it would be on the subject of domestic violence, which has been my primary focus. But this topic chose me, as they say. The book seemed to get more political as I wrote, even though at first glance this does not seem like a particularly political topic. But Shattered Motherhood is, broadly speaking, about the politics of women's grief. It's not an easy topic. In fact, it doesn't get more harrowing. Losing a child to suicide is every mother's worst nightmare. A number of people have told me that the book scared them. They didn't even want to open it. But once they started reading, they couldn't put it down. One woman told me that the book got her through a very difficult time. How is this possible with a subject so grim? But this is the power of feminism and of women talking together in a room of our own. It's an excruciating topic, yes, but I think in the end it's a very positive and empowering book. Mothers bereaved by child suicide come together to offer each other a depth of compassion and a kind of knowing only they can give. They place themselves and their struggle at the center of the conversation. No small achievement when you have been taught all your life to put others first. The book invites the reader into this room and into the magic and visionary power of this space. The seed for Shattered Motherhood was planted in a conversation I had with a grieving mother back in 2006. In my capacity as counselor in a police crisis unit, I was visiting a woman named Judy, whose 21-year-old son had recently taken his own life. She was barely functioning. We sat in silence for a long time. Eventually, she started to speak. What kind of a mother has a child who commits suicide? What kind of a mother am I that this could happen to my child? That I couldn't see it coming, that I couldn't prevent it. I wasn't sure what to say. She'd already heard the platitudes 1,000 times about what a great mother she had been. Everybody was telling her to let go of the guilt. She wasn't having it. We sat in more silence. I asked her if there was anything under the sun that would help. She sat up and looked me straight in the eye, suddenly completely self-possessed. I need to meet another mother who has been through this. I need to see that she has survived and that she is not a monster. I felt a chill run down my spine. Never had a woman given me such insight into her inner world with a single word. It's a term reserved for perpetrators of the worst atrocities. Most recently, we hear it in relation to Dominique Pellicot, dubbed the Monster of Maison. I didn't know it then, but I know now. Judy was providing powerful insight into the social construction of motherhood, into what we do to mothers. She didn't get there by herself. I assured Judy I would find her a group for mothers in the same situation. I quickly discovered that no such support exists. The depth of the crisis for the mother was not on anybody's radar. In response, I set up a group right at the police station for mothers whose kids had taken their own lives. I knew that if I could get the mothers in the same room, magic would happen. And it did. The group became a lifeline for the mothers. Only in that room did they feel completely safe, free from stigma and blame. Being in a room of grieving mothers is enough to rip your heart out. I always experienced it as sacred space. I knew I was witnessing a struggle at the heart of life itself. Whatever is the source of life, I think mothers are the closest we get to it. The death of a child in any circumstances is a trial that pushes a mother to the limits of her endurance. When the death comes by the child's own hand, the mother is in addition placed on trial by society and in her own mind. The finger points in one direction. Adding to her life-threatening pain is an unyielding sense that her inadequacies as a mother contributed to her child's death. Complicating things for her is the fact that nobody is actually blaming her. In fact, everybody's telling her the opposite, that it's not her fault. Women live in this crazy-making space where the adverse forces acting on our lives are often invisible and denied. Oblivious to these forces, we fall prey to them. Thus it was that the mothers in that room were not looking to be absolved of their guilt. On the contrary, they were stepping up for their punishment. They are the mothers, and the buck stops with them. I must say I found much to admire in the mother's sense of duty. What a different world we would have if everybody felt this level of responsibility for children. But before long, I found myself getting angry. The contradictions were starting to build. I was suspicious of the guilt because I'd seen it before in my past work. I had seen how little we support mothers and how readily we blame them. I knew that women's tears are the cheapest fluids on earth, to quote Germaine Greer. And I couldn't square the mother's persistent sense of failure with all they had sacrificed and suffered for their kids. Most had been forced to raise their children under challenging circumstances. Some of their partners had been abusive. It was they, the mothers, who had in the main shouldered the burden of care when the child began to flounder. Their profound sorrow I understood, but feeling they had contributed to their child's death through their failures and inadequacies as mothers, no, I couldn't accept that. It was clear to me that the guilt needed to come off, but nothing I or anyone said made a difference. No matter how many times friends or professionals tell the mother of the suicided child to let go of the guilt, she won't be able to. Ultimately, I wrote this book because I wanted to take the guilt off the mothers. In the process of writing, I realized that only the mothers themselves can remove the guilt. The book was a challenge to write. Well, I should say parts were very challenging. Capturing the mother's pain in their own words was easy. Their words poured into the room as pure poetry. Helping the mothers find a way out of the guilt, that was the hard part. What was the path? I couldn't see it myself. Perhaps I perceived it dimly. I sensed that my work with battered women had prepared me to work with mothers whose kids had taken their own lives. But how? What's the connection? Not all women who have lost a child to suicide have been abused, so that's not the link, though some will have been, and this requires a massive feminist analysis, which I make in the book. It finally occurs to me, the link is women's gratuitous suffering under the patriarchal power structure. Simply that. I knew the key to empowering battered women is to engage them in a process of consciousness raising. If women can't see the power structure, they will continue to blame themselves for the breakup of the family and the harms done to their children, and they will remain vulnerable to being abused. I began to suspect that the only sure route out of guilt for the mothers is for them to come to consciousness about their condition as women and the oppressive conditions in which they mother. I'm talking about the institution of motherhood with its impossible prescription for accommodation, service, and perfection, and which holds mothers responsible for everything that goes wrong in the family. And so in the book, I embark upon a process of consciousness raising with the mothers. I begin with myself and my own mother's depression, and the two sexual assaults in my university years that woke me up to my subordinate status. Consciousness raising is a kind of you go first thing. Somebody has to start telling the truth about her own life. Gradually, women start to realize they're not alone, and the space starts to open up, and connections start to be made between my sexual assaults and yours, between my mother's depression and yours, between our second-class status as women and the intractable guilt of the world's mothers. Shattered Motherhood is dripping with unrestrained admiration for mothers. I actually wrote this book in homage to mothers for all they give, sacrifice, and suffer in their reproductive role. Sometimes I think not being a mother myself puts me in a better position to see how amazing they are. I see them as heroes. Mothers are heroic in the work of giving birth, putting their lives on the line to bear children. 800 women around the world die in childbirth every day. That's one woman every 2 minutes. But there are no medals for mothers, no halls of fame. It's just another woman having a baby. Mothers are heroic in the act of caring. They just step up and do it 24/7, often into old age, often in situations of adversity and threat, because there's a life or lives to be tended to. But rarely will you hear a mother singing her own praises. She's more likely to tell you all the ways she's screwing up. But how can mothers value themselves in a world where they are overworked, under-resourced, underappreciated, blamed, and where, when push comes to shove, and I mean this literally as well as figuratively, they have no power. The starting place for maternal guilt is the low value we place on mothers, which is, of course, nested in the low value we place on women. If there is anger in my book, and I hope there is, it is because I find what we do to mothers abhorrent. I find maternal guilt a particularly cruel patriarchal contrivance, mixed up as it is with the beauty and brilliance of women's reproductive powers and the joys of being a mother. My final chapter is a call for men and their institutions to atone for all the gratuitous suffering imposed on mothers. What do I hope readers will take from my book? I hope the book will help mothers of suicided kids get on solid ground. To survive the loss of a child to suicide requires all of a mother's spiritual and psychological resources. I want women to have the dignity of a struggle that is not undermined by spurious charges of inadequate mothering. I hope the book will help mothers generally recognize how brilliant they are and come to reject maternal guilt as a scam. I hope the book encourages women to come together in small groups, which I now refer to as haylofts, to talk about our lives. The hayloft image comes from Sarah Polley's inspiring film, Women Talking, based on the novel by Miriam Toews, which is, in turn, based on real-life events that occurred in a Mennonite colony in Bolivia in the 2000s. More than 130 women and girls, including small children, were rendered unconscious by cow tranquilizer and raped by their own brethren. Apparently, chemical submission is not a new thing. Long story short, it didn't go well for the women. The women were forced to forgive or forget. The women were forced to forgive or face eternal damnation and were denied counseling by the elders on the ground that they were unconscious during the rapes. That's what happened in real life. The film imagines a different outcome. It's a work of feminist imagination that places women at the center of the story. In the film, 8 of the violated women assemble in a hayloft to talk. They are at a crossroads and must decide whether to continue to accept the conditions imposed on them or take a different path. There are 3 options on the table: stay and do nothing, stay and fight, or leave. A single soul-searching conversation about a particular problem becomes a meditation on the universal plight of women. I was midway with my book when I saw the movie. It fired my imagination, and it powered the book. I reference Women Talking at least 4 times. I think women find ourselves at a similar crossroads. We need to decide whether we're going to continue to accept the conditions imposed upon us or take a different path. I now envision women meeting in metaphorical haylofts in every community for every problem, doing the work of our own liberation, taking back our lives, our sanity, and our motherhood through the power of women talking. I'll end with some words of thanks to the mothers. Working with you has been among the most meaningful work I've ever done. Thank you for trusting me with your lives. Thank you for trusting me with your lives and your kids and your words. It's through your stories that mothers similarly bereaved will begin to find compassion for themselves. Special thanks to Kate, who has broken the silence about the suicide of a child that occurs in the context of an abusive relationship. I learned so much from you. To Renata, Susan, Pauline, and all the women at Spinifex, thank you for your commitment to radical feminist publishing and for your patience with me as a new author. Thank you for everything you gave me. I adore you all, though it's no secret that my favorite member of the team is Nala, the dog. Nala made it clear to me at the beginning that she runs the show at Spinifex, and the truth of her claim has certainly borne out over time. Thank you to my amazing local editors, Jan Andrews and Rosemary Murphy, who guided my writing every step of the way. This book would not have seen the light of day without your support. Thank you to the 9 women who wrote powerful words of endorsement for my book. And finally, thank you to my friend and mentor, Helen Levine, who opened my eyes to the power politics of motherhood. May her memory be a disruptive force. Thank you for listening.